to leave the European Union is up 2 percentage points, standing at 43%, according to the latest poll. That's the highest proportion in favour of Brexit since last May. Joining us now to discuss this a bit further is Ansar. He's a political and social commentator, and also Toni Bugle from the English Democrats Party. Good evening to you both. Thanks very much for coming on to RT this evening. Mo, if I can start with you first. We're just hearing there that since the terrorist atrocities that took place in Brussels yesterday, there's been a significant boost, hasn't there, for the pro-Brexit campaign. People clearly feel that Britain might be safer out of the EU following the events yesterday. What's your take on that?
I think the difficulty we have is that when we look at the increasing migrant and refugee problem in Europe, there are growing calls in Europe, understandably, and they're pointing at the refugees, they're pointing at the migrant communities and saying, you're the problem. In fact, when we look at the attacks in the US, when we look at 9/11, when we look at the shootings they had recently, when we look at 7/7, we look at the Charlie Hebdo, we look at Paris. When we look at this whole array, these are homegrown extremists and homegrown terrorism. This has nothing to do with refugees. So while we have the likes of Donald Trump, the far-right Alternative for Deutschland, the Pegida and the domestic far-right within the UK and across Europe calling for hardening conditions against refugees, I'm not sure this is sustainable.
Tony, let's bring you in here, Tony. What's your view on that, then, that we shouldn't be afraid of refugees? The problem we have with terrorism are homegrown terrorists.
Well, that's not factually correct anyway, and I noticed it didn't take very long to come out with the far-right tag or mentioning of anybody who apparently is far-right. What we have to understand is that with mass immigration has come extremists. We have imams coming in from abroad, from Saudi Arabia, Iran. Children are being radicalised in this country, but we do have extremists coming in through mass immigration. Now, as far as I'm concerned, people of this country have a right to feel safe. They don't feel safe, and the government have a duty of care to the people of this country, regardless of colour, creed, creation or faith. They have a right to feel safe, and they don't. And a mass immigration with an open border policy is insanity.
Mo, as you heard there, that people feel unsafe, don't they? I mean, clearly the solution, it seems, for many people, look, if we do take tighter control of our borders, then it will be problem solved, at least temporarily.
Look, I think part of the problem with their groups like the English Democrats is their own communications director recently wrote a piece where he said there's no more neutrality in the world. You either have to be part of the solution or you've got to be part of the problem. And estimating that somewhere in the region of 35% of Muslims are radical and are a potential threat to existential life in the West. The reality is that we cannot give in to the politics of prejudice and the politics of hate. The Brexit campaign, they've lost the economic argument,
prejudice,
they've lost the moral and ethical argument, and so, well, the reality is this, people are scared, absolutely, but you don't react in knee-jerk way, you don't react in a way which is going to whip up hysteria and hatred. The reality is, and we keep talking about the reality because they're peddling myths and perceptions which are false. This is complete disinformation from the domestic far right.
OK, let's let Tony respond to that. Tony, you're peddling myths and fiction.
Well, no, I think actually Mo does all the peddling. That's why he was exposed on Twitter as being a fraud. He is a fraud. He doesn't represent the mainstream Muslims of this country.
I think you should be careful of making libelous allegations. I think you should be careful of making libelous allegations.
It's very rude to interrupt, Mo. It's very rude to interrupt. I believe you'll find that you were exposed as being... I remember watching you on Twitter where you gave advice to a woman.
Let's just stick to the question I asked you, Tony. Tony, let me just...
It's very rude to interrupt, Mo.
Tony, I'm interrupting you now. Just the question was, you've been accused of a knee-jerk reaction there. What's your reaction to that?
It's not a knee-jerk reaction. This has been happening for so many years. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. But what you are seeing is the majority of the people in this country are ignored by mainstream media. They are ignored by our government. There is a problem. And no, not all Muslims are terrorists. Absolutely not. Not all Muslims are the problem. But when you see 10,000 Muslims in moral outrage over a cartoon, where are the same 10,000 Muslims in moral outrage over Brussels, Cologne, Rotherham? Where are the 10,000 Muslims in moral outrage over that? Tell me that, Mo.
Okay, I'll answer those things. When we look at what's happened in Brussels, for example, when we look at places like Sint Jan Molenbeek, when we look at the areas of Brussels that are affected, this is going before the recent spate of attacks, going back almost 10 years, and there's an estimated 40% of that population which are Muslim. In other areas of Brussels, the estimates of the Muslim population, there's nearer 50%. They have been suffering overwhelming discrimination, social disenfranchisement, marginalisation. Now, this is no apologism for acts of terrorism, but when you've got such a failure within the European infrastructure to integrate successfully communities who are changing, and so you are favouring white European communities and have racist policies, discriminatory policies against Muslims and ethnic minorities. These people grow up angry, they grow up disaffected, they grow up angry at the state.
You just brought in the colour. You are the one that's just made a racist comment by bringing up the word white. I would never, ever judge a person on their skin colour.
Talking about race is not racist.
Sorry? No. You want to make your mind up then, because every time somebody opens their mouth...
English Democrats. Your whole identity is based on race.
I was born in England.
I was born in England as well. Do you recognise the fact that I'm English as well? Do you recognise that I'm English?
I'm English. No, you call yourself Muslim first, British second. That's what you refer to yourself. You refer to yourself as being Muslim first, British second.
I'll call myself today, for the sake of argument.
Not my description of you. Not my description of you. I'm English. I'm very proud to be English. Don't interrupt.
Guys, let me just ask you this, Mo. Let me just come to you with a question. Tony, a few minutes ago, said that the Muslim community should do more to come out.
The underlying issue is about extremism and radicalisation.
OK, but Toni just said that she felt the Muslim community should come out and condemn more explicitly the attacks that took place in Brussels. Do you agree?
I think the Muslim community has been leading the charge and leading the national campaign and the international debate on counter-radicalisation. However, what we've seen across Europe, especially in Britain, is a prime example, and the English Democrats should really be engaging with this issue. The British government, ever since the Blair government came into place, has had an increasingly hard attitude and has decided not to engage with Europe's largest representative Muslim democratic organisation, like the Muslim Council of Britain, like other civil society organisations. Instead, they're seeding organisations like the Quilliam Foundation, who peddle a neoconservative narrative, organisations who are peddling an Anglo-American neoconservative pro-NATO stance, and individuals within the Muslim community who are independent thinkers that come from the communities that work and represent communities. These people have been completely disenfranchised. Immediately after the Brussels attacks, what did we see? We saw organisations like the domestic and European far right, like these interests and these pro-West, pro-government organisations coming out and saying, this is why Muslims need to assimilate more, this is why we're having a problem with integration. These terrible, terrible incidents, which of course are deplorable, we completely condemn all these acts of violence. They're not representative of Islam, and people who peddle myths that say that somehow the Paris attacks, the Brussels attacks, 7/7 or 9/11 are representative of Islam are completely living in a fantasy world. This just isn't reality.
Whether you like it or not, whether you like it or not, Mo, whether it is your Islam or somebody else's Islam, there is only one Islam. Unfortunately, there are a lot of young Muslims who do believe they are at war with the West. They are following the verses of the sword. They are committing atrocities in the name of Islam. They believe they are Muslim. They call themselves Muslim. I don't title them that. They do. Now, the other problem you have to understand is you say that I'm disenfranchised. Let me tell you now, I give an immense amount of support to Muslim women. I've taken Muslim women into my home, fleeing from their own communities that wanted them dead. So before you say I'm disenfranchised, you should know who it is that you're actually talking to and understand what it is I do. That's one of the reasons that I am backing Marilys Cox with her parliamentary bill to address the issue of Sharia.
I won't take any lessons on Islam from you, firstly. I think, in fairness, I won't take a lesson on Islam from you.
I do speak to the Muslim communities. You need to take lessons, Mo, on... You talk about integration. You are one of the biggest segregators congregations.
What complete
of this
nonsense!
country.
I come
You
from
are
the
one of
Muslim
biggest
communities. I
problems
lead
with,
prayers. I work within
you do not
with Muslim
most
scholars,
Muslims
and
will tell you
I'm
do not
from
represent
the Muslim
them.
communities. All right, we won't have the domestic far right who have more in common with fascism, Trump and neo. We have more in common. I studied law. I went to law.
Okay.
I studied law. I went to law school.
Both of you.
You claim to
Both of you. Okay, I'm not. Mo, we'll leave your
I think
education to
the
one side for the
reality is
moment.
this.
I just
Look,
want to ask.
look.
Stop Islam is a hashtag that came out just after these attacks. It does show. It's trended pretty strongly, and it does show that people are genuinely concerned, don't they, about the Muslim community. However you want to frame it, there is genuine concern.
The concern is about the Muslim community.
Are you asking
and
me?
every time
Sorry,
we've
no,
seen
Mo,
incidents,
go ahead.
Every time we've seen terrorist incidents in Europe, which have often been attributed to disenfranchisement, foreign policy, domestic policy, it's a very, very complex milieu, a cultural milieu of reasons for the increasing extremism and radicalisation. But every time we've seen terrorist incidents occur across Europe, we've seen a massive backlash against Muslims. The backlash we've seen include things like the hashtag Stop Islam, but have included, and who are targeted. We've seen old men coming back from the mosque being murdered on the streets of Britain and in Europe. We've seen fire bombings on mosques. We've seen pigs' heads being left outside mosques. We've seen Muslim women with hijabs, having the hijabs pulled off. And we've seen Muslim women being targeted and being attacked. You share more in common. You are part of the problem because you share more in common with the domestic far right. Well, then leave the English Democrats and join
wholeheartedly and condemn any attack on any Muslim. I would
how can you work with a far-right organisation then? Then how can you work? How can you work with a neo-fascist and pro-Nazi organisation?
You're being ridiculous. You're being ridiculous. Talking over me, Mo. Is it because I'm a woman you don't want me to speak? Be quiet long enough to let somebody finish.
Look, stop playing to that ridiculous trope. What you are saying is offensive, and you are part of a domestic neo-fascist organisation. I will absolutely interrupt if you're talking nonsense.
I will continue. I will finish what I'm trying to say.
Mo, just 2 minutes. Mo,
this was the 1930s. You'd be the
Mo, for 2 minutes, just allow Tony to speak. Tony, go ahead. Tony, go ahead.
I will condemn any violence towards any Muslim for no good reason. Of course I will condemn it. Of course it's not acceptable. But what nobody seems to want to say is how many non-Muslims are attacked. Where's the condemnation for that? If anybody dares say anything that is even remotely derogatory or a criticism of Islam, we're automatically targeted and told we are far-right extremists. I am not far-right, Mo. I'm just not far wrong. And that's what you hate the most, is that people are speaking up. And Muslims will more likely stand with me against somebody like you, because you don't represent them. You do not. And most of them will tell you that themselves. You know this.
What a ridiculous comment. Nicola, listen. I've spent, Nicola, I spent 18 months.
My name is Tony.
I spent 18 months.
My name is Tony.
Sorry, my apologies.
My name is Tony.
Thank you, okay. Thank you. I spent 18 months reaching out to the domestic far right with the English Defence League. I was put at the top of the Al-Shabaab kill list when I condemned the Woolwich killings, when I condemned the terrorist incidents across Britain and across Europe. Look, I've faced extremists wherever they are, and I'm telling you, the English Democrats are part of a neo-fascist movement across Europe. They're part of the far right. If you genuinely want to engage with communities, your own communications director,
come along and meet the English Democrats. Come along and meet the English Democrats, and then you can make accusations.
I'm not going to mainstream the fringe ideas.
I'm not levelling accusations.
Tony, you are now talking over me. Tony,
Mo, let me jump in for 1 second. Tony, Mo, I want to move this on slightly.
You've asked me to answer.
I want to move this on slightly. Where does this leave?
I don't understand why we're debating Islam today, because there are so many big political issues, so many social issues we need to address, so many issues domestic.
Right, one of those,
making all about Islam.
One of those at the moment is the, and we touched on it at the start, but the migration crisis and the refugee crisis in Europe at the moment. Mo, do you believe this is going to drive a big wedge into Europe at the moment about how to solve the refugee crisis, given what happened yesterday?
I think there is a wedge being driven, but I think, interestingly enough, the Stop Islam hashtag was a prime example of how this works. We had people exploiting the tragic deaths, and our hearts and our thoughts still go out with those victims out there. And what we saw the far right and the hard right exploiting the situation to peddle this idea that it's Muslims that are the problem, it's refugees that are the problem, when this isn't the case at all, and all the research shows that to be the case. However, the Stop Islam hashtag also showed another thing, which is that the anti-Islam movement is strong across Britain and it's strong across Europe, particularly strong in Brussels, where Katie Hopkins was peddling this far-right English Democrat-style narrative about hating and prejudice against immigrants and Muslims and refugees, and a Belgian person came out, and a Belgian person came out, and a Belgian person came out and told Katie Hopkins, "You are not welcome in Belgium, but refugees are welcome." And so, actually, the divisiveness we've seen has been between the far right and the hard right, who share. Please don't interrupt. Please don't interrupt.
Have you finished?
We've seen the wedge.
Have you finished?
I'll stop.
Mo,
when you go
20
next,
seconds
okay?
more.
We've seen the hard right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We've seen the wedge that you are referring to is a real thing, and we saw it in the 1930s as well. The last time we saw this dark cloud appearing, we see the wedge coming between the hard right, and this is people of all races and all religions who are against Muslims, against migrants, against immigrants, and then we see a rainbow coalition of people who believe in plurality, a multicultural, a multi-faith Europe where we've got enough jobs, we've got enough space. We just need to show the love to welcome people in and to change our policies.
Mo,
if we change our policies into rebuilding our infrastructure, we can engage better with Muslim communities.
No, he'll
Tony,
continue. He likes to do that. Right, the last say is this. I like a multicoloured country. I was raised to embrace all different people from all backgrounds. But a multicultural country has been shown to fail. As for him demonising anybody who wants to call themselves English as being far right, we're not far right, we're just not far wrong. What Mo despises more than anything else, there is a problem. And the problem is there is mass immigration. And whether we like it or not, the crimes being committed right now are being done in the name of Islam. Whether you are doing it or not is irrelevant. It is being done in that name. So how are we supposed to react? Are we supposed to sit there and go, oh, it's okay, all these attacks have happened, but we'll welcome more in? You need to shut the border, get it under control, then we can target the homegrown terrorists, we can flush out the extremists in the country, then we can deal with the problem, then we can have controlled immigration, and then we can perhaps what would be really nice is see some Christians who are being slaughtered in their masses. Maybe we should open the doors to them, because I don't see many of them coming into the country.
OK, look, Toni Bugle, Mo Ansar, thank you both very much for coming on to RT. I know it's a topic you both feel extremely passionate about. Thank you for giving us your opinion.